Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description. Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We're recording this episode on transfer deadline day. The time is around 20 minutes past 11 and I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst. So just keep the time in mind when we're running through the transfer news. Obviously, everything happens quite fast on deadline day. There's a lot of moving parts, but we'll give do our best to react to the news, what we've been told this morning so far, and we'll get into it starting from there. So Samuel, how are you on this busy morning?
I'm enshrouded in darkness, even though it's light in here. So I think Reach have got a lot to answer for with the laptop they've saddled me with, unfortunately. So yeah, apologies. This isn't my mood or my demeanor. This is just a pretty naff laptop. It feels like, or it's a laptop that's on its last legs.
It's probably worth going across to YouTube if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, just to see Samuel sitting in the darkness.
Or
he
don't.
Isn't sitting in the
Just
darkness.
don't.
Yeah. We'll get straight into it, Samuel. The goalkeeper situation is probably at the forefront of everyone's minds right now. Ruben Amorim has started the season by starting Altay Bayindir as the first choice in Premier League games. Onana was recalled for Grimsby. He made a mistake of his own. Bayindir has made errors. Unfortunately, the goalkeeping situation is a bit of a mess. We've expected United to make a move. They've obviously been in talks with Senne Lammens at Royal Antwerp, who need to cash in. But there is also some interest in Emi Martinez, who for some reason, I think Fabrizio Romano keeps calling Dibu on social media. I'm not sure where that's come from. What is the latest on the goalkeeper situation? Because as I said in the intro, there's a lot of moving parts at the moment this morning as we're recording.
Well, yeah, they're still looking to sign one. And I think that it's pretty clear that Amorim's assessment of that area has evolved over time. That said, I think right at the start of the year, I wrote that they were looking for a new goalkeeper, but not necessarily an outright number one. And the two names that you've just mentioned, they're very different profiles. One is clearly, if that was to happen with Martinez, he would be the outright number one. Signing a Belgian goalkeeper from Royal Antwerp who's never played for the national team, he's not necessarily going to be going in as number one. But also, in terms of the moving parts, there's never really been a market for Onana this summer, and that was compounded by his injury, and that's of course had an impact on his lack of playing time. And he's played one game out of, if you include in pre-season, out of is that 9, I think, overall. He's lost his place at Manchester United. There's only so much United can do in terms of selling players who at a loss as well. I know that there are some windows that are going to be open after today. I think the Saudi Pro League is one of them, and I always thought that if Onana was to leave permanently, that would be the logical escape route. And you've seen that happen a lot with players of his age profile or his background go to Saudi Arabia. But he is also a hard sell at the moment because he's had a dreadful calendar year, and he's lost his status as United's first choice. So, and I think it's been quite apparent for 2 or 3 years that even the Saudi Pro League teams, they've got United's number. They're not just taking any old Tom, Dick, or Harry off United's hands. They've not bought Casemiro off them. When I think United would ideally have thought, well, he should be easy to shift there, but that's not been the case. So Onana could be marooned at United. United could be saddled with Onana. I still think that having 4 senior goalkeepers, it seems excessive, but they should have gone about this in a very different way. I mean, I think it was back in May that they didn't regard, May or early June, they didn't regard a keeper as a priority. And clearly to an extent, that's true. To an extent, it has evolved in that the attack had to be the priority. They've invested more than £200 million there, but they were looking at a goalkeeper before the transfer window opened. They're now stepping up those efforts and have done over the past week or so to get a keeper in. And how many goals they conceded this season? Is it 2, 4, 6 goals they've conceded? 4 of them have been goalkeeper errors. So it's pretty clear that they do need a goalkeeper. And I think people, certainly a lot of United fans, were of that opinion before the window opened anyway. But it's still not ideal, because they seem to be umming and ahhing as to whether it should be someone who's coming in who's won a couple of Copa Americas and a World Cup final, having made 2 or 3 extremely important saves. I mean, the save from Muani was obviously, if that goes in, then France probably win the World Cup, and Argentina are stuck on 2 World Cups still. And Martinez, I do think, has dined off that performance. And look, if you're going to dine off a performance, it's a World Cup final is the best one to do it, and to perform in a World Cup final, which is clearly the biggest game in football, you've got to have something about you. But having watched him quite a lot over the past 5 years, he is very erratic. He is prone to a clangor. I mean, it kind of writes itself in that United are looking to sign a goalkeeper who committed a blunder at United last season in a team that was even worse at Old Trafford than United. I mean, Aston Villa were appalling on the final day of last season, completely bottled their opportunity to qualify for the Champions League. And that's despite the fact that Altay Bayindir did his utmost to give them a goal when he was bailed out by an egregious error by the referee after spilling the ball into the path of Morgan Rogers. But I don't think I don't think Martinez is anywhere near as good a goalkeeper as his salary or these FIFA awards that they dole out for doing one thing or the other suggests. There's a reason why. I know obviously football has changed a lot to the point that Bournemouth are signing someone from AC Milan, which feels, in that context, it seems strange, but it isn't, because the Premier League is where the money is king. But if Emiliano Martinez was that good a goalkeeper, he would not be at Aston Villa. Gianluigi Donnarumma is the best goalkeeper in the world. He plays for the Champions League winners. It looks like he's going to move to Manchester City, who've been probably the best club side of the past 10 years, or certainly the majority of that time. Martinez is not the answer. And I think that's why, as we've discussed before, I think United would have liked to have got away with not signing a goalkeeper this summer, but that position, not only are the first choices very erratic goalkeepers or just bad goalkeepers, I don't think the manager has really handled that situation well either. I think that, unfortunately, Ruben Amorim has mismanaged it with some contrary calls, just starting the season with Bayindir rather than Onana. Onana's confidence probably took a hit from that. And if he'd had a good couple of years at United, I think you could have dismissed that Grimsby performance as him looking rusty, but it wasn't. Unfortunately, we've become very accustomed to him dropping clangers, making mistakes, and costing United. But Bayindir costs United as well. He made another mistake at the weekend, and all the while, Tom Heaton is clearly never ever going to get a look into the point that he almost certainly will never play for Manchester United again, which is a rarity for a player to be under contract at a club. But to go, I think it's 2.5 years since he last played, so he'll probably go 3.5 years without actually playing for United, when at the moment he's probably he is the most stable goalkeeper they could pick.
The World Cup final is almost 3 years ago now, obviously, when Argentina won against France. A lot of water has gone under the bridge since then. Emi Martinez, I was speaking to a friend, an Aston Villa supporting friend, who said he would not care to see him leave the club. I think he's a bit disappointed at Villa Park in the last season, in the last 18 months. Having said that, though, Samuel, you've said that Martinez isn't the answer. It's fascinating when you compare the profile of the two targets, because one is a young, inexperienced goalkeeper, and one has been around the block and has seen it all and played in the World Cup final. Lammens seems to be the priority, I think, at this point of deadline day. But do United need another young, inexperienced goalkeeper who obviously comes attached with risk? Or would Martinez not be the better choice because of that Premier League experience? He is a Premier League proven player.
Again, with the and ahhing, they can't. It seems like they can't make their mind up. In that they'll say, "Oh, the data told us to go for Patrick Dorgu," and Jason Wilcox mentioned in his statement when they signed Sesko about the data, and Sir Jim Ratcliffe said, "Oh, the data at United, it's been stuck in the 20th century." And then when push comes to shove, it's let's have a look at the goalkeeper who saved some penalties in the World Cup final. And
do you not think clubs like to, obviously they've got these leading data systems now, but they still like to, there's still an element of using the eye test as well. As much as they've got these systems in place, there is always going to be transfers where someone's opinion will take prominence.
But I always think that you can't really compensate for seeing someone in person, and I know that that's dying out now. And look, if Brighton are doing it, who are we to argue with that? Because their hit rate in recruitment is exceptional. It's at a very different level. I mean, they literally can afford to scout all these all these distant territories and unearth these gems, polish them, and then sell them at a profit of God knows how much. United can't do that. They can't just assemble a squad of absolute unknowns and think they can get away with it. Like, Amrim saying about Sesko, he needs time. I'm sorry, but you're not going to get that excuse in here at Manchester United. United needs someone to come in and score goals. This is not some unknown. Yes, he's 22. Yes, he's relatively young, but he's been playing at a relatively high level in Germany. He's been playing in the Champions League. You've spent more than £70 million to sign him. Can we get him to score some goals? And if he isn't, then you've just done another Rasmus Højlund, who's someone that they've written off after 2 years. So, when you see a player in person, you see how they are off the ball. You see what their character's like. Are they moody? Are they a good influence on their teammates? Are they a bad influence? How do they interact with the dugout during pauses? Do they go over? Do they take instructions on board? Are they attentive? Are they inattentive? These things are important in terms of trying to get a gauge on a player's character. Now, Martinez clearly is a character, and the irony is he actually comes across quite well in interviews. As a goalkeeper, he's someone that opposition fans, it's not difficult to despise him. I think it's safe to say, like, United fans took great glee in bidding him goodbye when he got sent off on the final day of last season, as they did when he walked off after they beat them in the FA Cup in January 2022, because they remembered a few months earlier him doing a celebratory jig in front of the Stretford end after Bruno Fernandes smacked his penalty into that end in added time, and Villa got a win at Old Trafford. So he's not exactly been popular at Old Trafford on a few of his visits there, but at the moment it's not difficult to look for an upgrade on Bayindir. I don't think you can even mention Onana because he's just not he's not a starter at the moment. He's clearly no longer United's number one, but they don't effectively have a number one. It's the number on Bayindir's shirt, but nobody looks at him and thinks, yeah, he's United's first choice goalkeeper. I think if somebody wrote those words together, you'd probably think, like, if you were a sub-editor, you'd probably think, well, is he? That is still up in the air when they're actually trying to get a goalkeeper in. But with the Lammens deal, that does feel more like Ineos. But the Manchester United goalkeeper position is so heavily scrutinised. And look at what happened to David De Gea as a 20-year-old coming in his first 6 months at the club. He had a torrid time, and he only really got going when Anders Lindegaard got injured. And that competition and that element of rotation that Sir Alex Ferguson had been opting for went out the window, because it was either David De Gea or it was Ben Amos. So it had to be De Gea. And then the final few months of that season, he was excellent. I mean, people forget, I think, in that first season, De Gea's highlights reel from pretty much February onwards, pretty much that save from Juan Mata was exceptional. The standard of saves he was making were world class, and he was playing well when United weren't playing well or when they were losing games. I remember Athletic Bilbao, going to Old Trafford and being absolutely terrific to watch and peppering the United goal. And United weren't really interested, because I think it was the Europa League and they'd been relegated to that, having gone out in the Champions League, and it was all about going for the title with City. But De Gea was terrific that night, and that just goes to show, even in a season where he was that young and that relatively callow, he still showed his class. But with De Gea, Sir Alex Ferguson literally skipped a Manchester United match at Scunthorpe United to go and watch De Gea play for Atletico Madrid against Valencia, because he wanted to see him with his own eyes. And of course, in those first few months De Gea had at United, people did think, is this guy really up to it? He looks undernourished. He's too scrawny. He's a pushover at corners. He's dodgy at corners. He's dropping the odd clanger here and there. There's some ability, but also this is the new Manchester United number one. You've gone from Edwin van der Sar, who's 15 or 16 years older than him, to someone who really does look like a schoolboy. So that's the scrutiny that comes with that role. And Onana was a similar kind of profile to Peter Schmeichel, in that I think he was the same age that Schmeichel was when he joined United. And look at what's happened to his career at United. So that's how unforgiving that position is. And it really is. I know, that there are people in football who are trying to reinvent the wheel, or saying, oh, it's the data tells us to look at the Lecce left back, even though Lecce are in the relegation zone, and he'll be the United starting left winger. I mean, that's not gone well, let's face it. You've got to also look at the profile. And, if given the choice, I mean, I would rather not have either of them. But Martinez has played in the Premier League. He's won the World Cup. He's played in major tournaments. He's won the Copa America. He came through a big club like Arsenal. He's clearly better equipped to handle the pressure that comes with playing for United. But he's also he's a keeper who commits clangers too often, as far as I'm concerned. And every goalkeeper has made mistakes, but I think he's made them far too often. And he is someone who is just dining off his reputation of denying Randall Kolo Muani as well as he did. With Lammens, I'd literally never heard of him until a couple of weeks ago. And if anyone outside Belgium said they'd heard of him, they're probably lying, because let's face it, who's using their free time to watch whatever the Belgian league is called these days? Who's using their free time to watch Royal Antwerp? Scouts exist to cover those bases and to see who's coming through. But if he comes in, you're still wondering who's the Manchester United number one. If Martinez was to come in, you know who the number one is. So that's why if it comes between them, you'd be inclined to do the Martinez deal. But it's clearly not as straightforward as that.
Edwin van der Sar signed for United at 34, didn't he? And that one didn't work out too badly. Jadon Sancho could go.
Yeah, he was twice the age of David De Gea, not 15 years old. I forgot. Yeah, I think he was 40 when he retired in 2011.
Jadon Sancho could go the other way, perhaps unrelated, perhaps as part of a deal. It's an interesting one, because Sancho left the 11th hour of the deadline day last summer, of course, to Chelsea, who then refused to pay their obligation to sign him. They paid a £5 million fee to break that obligation, which was rather embarrassing for Sancho.
He's barely worth £5 as well.
I mean, that joke said it itself there, didn't it? Roma were interested, couldn't agree personal terms again. I think Sancho has to be realistic about his level and his expectations, but it seems he could be going to Villa Park, another United reject on loan, just like Rashford, in the January transfer window.
I know Villa are becoming the new Everton, United's new Everton, that they want United rejects. Sounds like they're signing Victor Lindelof as well, which I'm amazed. If Lindelof gets a Premier League club, he has done very well. And look, he won't even have to move house, given how quickly it is to get to Aston down the M6 from Chester. So I am surprised by that. But Villa have had such a bad start to the season. Clearly, there's an element of disarray going on there, and they probably feel as though someone who has played in the Premier League can lift them. But this just does not reflect well on them whatsoever. I think Sancho will be so fortunate if he gets that move, because all summer, I think a Premier League option's just not been on the table for him. It's just seemed like he would have to go to Italy to get his exit route, as a lot of players have done in the Premier League in recent years. Italy has become this dumping ground for players who are not deemed good enough at a lot of Premier League clubs, not even major Premier League clubs. Again, going back to Bournemouth last season, they loaned Philip Billing to Napoli, and Napoli won the title last season. And Bournemouth, with all due respect, they're Bournemouth. They've got a tiny ground, and they're doing phenomenally well in the Premier League. But it is pretty crazy when you think of it like that. This provincial club can call the shots when it comes to dealing with the team that are about to win the Italian league. That is how much in decline Italian football and Serie A still is. As evocative as the sites are out there, and as passionate and football centric as a nation it is, it's a league that's been in decline for 20 years, to the point that Bournemouth can call the shots with some of their biggest clubs. And Sancho, clearly he's on I think he's on some like 250 grand a week, but it's not quite that much at the moment, where United haven't been qualifying for the Champions League, so there's that 25% salary reduction that's impacted him. So impacted him as if he's on the breadline, when clearly he isn't. But that does kind of, in terms of balancing the books, PSR, his salary will be quite similar to Emiliano Martinez's at Villa, given that Martinez signed a new contract last summer that was essentially just remuneration for his profile rocketing after helping Argentina to win the World Cup 18 months earlier. 18 months earlier, I think. So that's where I think the interest has come, and where it's been floated, and that if United can get one player out who's on the similar wage and another player comes in on a similar wage without them paying a fee, then that helps. But this just does not reflect well on Aston Villa at all whatsoever, for them to be signing Jadon Sancho. I mean, they've done very well under Unai Emery, but this does rather undermine it. I could kind of understand Rashford in January, but when you're stooping to the low of Sancho or Victor Lindelof.
Well, what's stranger, signing Sancho on deadline day frantically after losing 3-0 to Crystal Palace, or responding Marco Bizot to every question before a game? That was just absolutely bizarre. Have you not seen the clip?
I've heard about it. I've not watched it yet. But
so maybe he has lost the plot. It does seem so.
There is a slight bit of the Alan Partridge about Unai Emery, who's a brilliant coach and is a good coach he's better than that. He's a very good coach. He's an excellent coach at a certain level. But given that the Villa have done very little strengthening their squad this summer, I can imagine his odds on being sacked or not seeing out the season are starting to shorten with every week, because there's a risk there that Villa will be mired in some stagnation there. So the Sancho deal. I mean, Rashford wasn't particularly good at Villa either, was he? Was it 4 goals in 17 games, and he was injured for the final month of the season? Missed the FA Cup semi-final when again they got battered by Palace 3-0 that day as well, didn't they? So maybe their bubble has burst now. There's been the odd. I think there was a book written about the rise of Aston Villa, and I'm thinking this team, like, what they went out. They did all right in the Champions League last season, reached the quarterfinals, but they bottled it on the final day at United to qualify for the Champions League. They bottled it in another FA Cup semi-final. They've not won a trophy since I was 8. This is how far we're going back, Stephen. You weren't even born when they won the League Cup in 1996. It was called the Coca-Cola Cup back then. This is how long we're going back. And there was a book written about the rise of Aston Villa. I think that this season could be so bad for them that they'll finish below United.
Anthony, let's move on to him, because he's set to get his move to Real Betis. United will receive a fixed fee of €22 million with a potential of €3 million in add-ons. So that works out around £90 million, £2.6 million in add-ons. It's a 50% sell-on clause included. But of course, Samuel, that means United will make a PSR loss, because the magic number was around 32.5, wasn't it? To avoid making a loss in the book. obviously was signed from Ajax in 2022, an £86 million deal. He's just been so disappointing, hasn't he? Finally, the chapter has ended. The book has been closed on Ante's time in Manchester. What more can you say? Just an awful signing, Samuel, and I'm personally glad it's over now.
I was never convinced by it. He was, as I've said before, when we talk about the data and the scouting, I took one look at a picture of Antony, and I just thought, no, just there was something too brash about him. And then you see the clips and that whole nonsense about the Antony, which is not, it's not even an impressive piece of skill. It's not like Ronaldinho controlling the ball on his shoulder, or there was that Brazilian footballer years ago called Kerlon, who I think he would balance it on his head like a seal, and he would actually try and dribble with it, and then players would try and decapitate him, and it would cause an outcry in Brazil, and the riot police would have to be brought in, or what have you. He was just he should never have been signed again. Like, that's where United were dancing to the tune of the manager, just because the manager had managed him in Ajax. And I mean, Erik ten Hag it's been quite the week for former United managers, because he's somehow only lasted a couple of games at Bayer Leverkusen. He's the third ex-United manager to have been sacked within the last week. But I mean, Ten Hag did some good things for United, but my goodness, how the hell did he look at Ajax, the team that he managed, and thought that the left-footed right winger that I really want, who we should be prepared to spend 100 million euros on, is Antony and not Mohamed Kudus. Now, Kudus, as I've said before, physically, he has the attributes to cut it in the Premier League, which is why he's moved to Tottenham. Antony was never cut out for the Premier League. He's not that quick. So he's one pace, he's one-dimensional, he's got one trick. And he had a decent first season, but there were issues with it. There was a lot of room for improvement, and it's been downhill ever since. As I reminded you on Saturday, the only left back I can remember him properly skinning was Dan Burn, and that seemed to end Dan Burn's career as a left back. And he's made a success of it at centre back. He's won a trophy with Newcastle, and somehow he's an England international as well. So if anything, Antony has had a big bearing on Dan Burn's second resurgence, or another lease of life that he's got later on in his career. But I remember when I spoke to Antony in the mix zone after he scored. It's probably the last Premier League goal he scored for United against Burnley, and that was even weird in that he hadn't scored a Premier League goal for probably close to a year at that point. Yet he had a videographer there present with a Sonic the Hedgehog toy, just in case he did score. And in fairness to him, he did score, but I just thought at the time, like, and this was against Burnley, and United didn't even win the game. And it was just so, like, sometimes footballers, they cannot read the room. I don't blame them for being tone deaf to what's being said about them, or ignoring all the noise on social media and what have you. It's not going to be healthy for them. But you should know, as a Manchester United player, how to conduct yourself, and really having a choreographed celebration ready is a very, very strange way of going about it. And clearly it was on my mind so much that there was, I believe I might have mentioned on a previous podcast, I did actually have this weird dream where I was sat a little bit lower down at Old Trafford, and Antony did score a goal. It was quite a good goal as well, from if I can remember the dream. And he ran into the dugout, and I think there was a videographer there taking a selfie of him. So I was clearly dwelling on this Sonic the Hedgehog celebration far too much, and that it interrupted my sleep and gave me quite the vivid dream. I literally dreamt of Antony. There's a headline if anyone wants.
I remember you telling that story at the time. Yeah, it could be argued it was a nightmare. Rasmus Højlund is off to Napoli. It's going to be a season-long loan, which includes an obligation. That obligation is expected to be met. I think it might be Napoli finishing in the Champions League places. They, of course, won the Scudetto last season with Antonio Conte in charge. It's another United reject going to Italy, Samuel.
Conte loves him, doesn't he?
He does. He really does. Yeah. I mean, he signed many for Inter Milan. We both agreed it probably would have been best to keep Højlund as second choice. He would have benefited from playing behind Sesko, although Sesko hasn't really played himself. But United made the decision to shift them on. It's not a surprise, is it? Because he scored 4 Premier League goals last season, and he's ultimately responsible for his time at United not working out.
There's a lot of nuance to it, as there is with any United player who fails, and he was destined to fail just from the off. The fee that was agreed, it was more than United said they were going to pay. The affiliation with Erik ten Hag through him switching to the SEG agency that represents ten Hag on the eve of the transfer, I think that marked his card as well. His profile was not the profile they needed at that time. Ten Hag wanted Harry Kane. United didn't test the waters with Tottenham. They opted for someone 10 years younger who, I mean, Kane is probably, he'll have scored more goals for Bayern Munich than Højlund has in his entire career. And you even look at Højlund's record for Denmark since he joined United, it's something like 16, maybe more. But I think he's only got 1 goal in his last 16 games for Denmark, and he was dropped for their last match as well. So it's another player who's gone to United and had his fingers burnt by it. He was over-promoted, he was overpriced, and he went into an environment that was not as stable as we felt at the time. Certainly when he joined the club, it felt like United were quite steady and they'd had a good season under Ten Hag, and the majority of the new signings had done well. But of course, that 23-24 season, it pretty much unravelled from the off with Greenwood, and then Sancho accusing Ten Hag of lying, then Anthony voluntarily going to a police station to give an interview because of the investigation in his private life. And this is before really the form started to go downhill as well. So that season was so fraught covering United. I mean, last season was clearly worse, but they didn't win anything and they finished 15th. But I would be surprised if in my lifetime I'd cover a more fraught or tempestuous Manchester United season than 23-24. And it was Højlund's misfortune that was his first season at the club. And in fairness to him, he had a creditable first campaign, scored 16 goals. Even when he was dropped for the run-in, he had a big role to play, coming on in a couple of games, scoring, coming on in the FA Cup final, doing well, helping to take the game away from City as United held on. He absolutely played his part that day. So he'll always have that. He'll have the fact that he's won an FA Cup with Manchester United, and it was one of the sweetest FA Cups they'll ever have had. So it's not a period in his life, in his professional career, that's been purely unhappy. There have been some wonderful moments for him, and he scored some good goals in that first season as well. And he was the player of the month in the Premier League for February. And let's face it, his importance was so immense at the time that when he got injured on the eve of that Fulham game in late February, where United were on a winning run, they had the momentum, that killed their Champions League qualifying hopes. That was it. And then the following day, it was the Amari Folsom game. It was Ten Hag making an inexplicable decision, and Fulham beat United 2-1. And that was it for them in terms of finishing in the top 4 and getting into the Champions League. But last season was inexcusable for him. Yes, he had a slow start, but because of the injury, the hamstring injury he suffered in pre-season, but after he came back in, after he recovered from that in September, he didn't have an injury for the rest of the season. And other decisions, like he can't be purely responsible, but he does have to take most of the responsibility. Like his social media strategy, very puerile. He clearly was someone who liked to be liked, but maybe that's not entirely fair of him, because when you speak to him in person, I think he's a different personality from this rather crass Instagram persona he projected through some ill-advised captions that were done for the banter crowd. To
be fair, it could have been his team, couldn't it? I mean, players these days a lot of the time do have people looking after their social media.
Yeah,
it could have been. It might have been him, but it might have been his team. We don't know, do we?
But ultimately, he must sanction it.
Yeah,
or
he has to take control.
Veto on it. It's his profile, and he's got the verified tick. But I do sympathise with how he's been treated by Amrim. I think Amrim has I know I'm on repeat here, but I do think he's cut his nose to spite his face with Højlund. And that has been to United's detriment, because the quirk of them is that they actually look quite good playing without a striker, but it has changed the dynamic of the way they attack, and they are struggling to score goals from open play. At the weekend, 2 of their 3 goals were an own goal and a penalty.
We agree on that. One thing we might not agree on is Kobbie Mainoo, Samuel, because he does look set to stay. There could be a late change, but we're not probably expecting him to move. Ruben Amorim said in his pre-Burnley press conference that he wanted Mainoo to stay, who had requested a loan move. And the reason why I say we might disagree on him is because I actually think he's well within his rights to kind of request a loan move and try head out for regular minutes. I can't see Samuel's face because he's sitting in the dark, but I'd quite like to see his reaction, purely because when you think back to last summer, starting against Spain in the Euro final, starting against Spain at the Euros, the World Cup will be in his mind next summer. And if he's not in Amorim's plans, if he's not going to get a kick, he could go from starting in the Euro final to not even making the England squad for the World Cup. United will be Mainoo's priority, but that will be a consideration, and it probably has been a consideration over the last few days.
I'm going to say something here that Will Unwin of The Guardian would revel in, because he mentioned on Saturday that I don't think I had made 3 references to The Sopranos, but he claimed that I had made 3 references to The Sopranos. But in tribute to Will, here is another reference to The Sopranos. But there's that scene, I think, at the start of the 3rd series when Tony summons Patsy Parisi, and he just says, have you got a problem? Have you got a problem? And Patsy Parisi just says no. The problem was that Tony had Patsy's twin brother whacked. So that is quite a big problem, and it's a bigger problem than any problems on Ruben Amorim's plate. But Amorim is entitled just to beckon Kobbie Mainoo into
I was wondering where you were going with
space office or one of these offices that are not the designated manager's office, whatever the hell it is at Carrington, and just say, what's your problem? And if Kobbie says, well, I'm not playing, Amorim isn't entitled to say, well, okay, you're not playing, you're not starting in the worst Manchester United team in 51 years. What does that say about you? They need, I know it's a lighter workload this season, but they need play it. They need a squad. They can't just get by with 14 players. They need, I mean, they're light enough in midfield to the point that Toby Collier must be thinking, Christ, should I have really accepted going to West Brom? He's yet to start for West Brom. I'm sure it will come in time. But that area is a real concern. And clearly, I think it's going to be a recurring problem between now and January, when we'll be wondering again, are they going to sign a midfielder? Because Casemiro is, frankly, still, I maintain, he's over the hill. He's a player that they've been looking to shift. Bruno Fernandes is papering over the cracks there. He made the difference on Saturday, and he had a much better week overall than he had in the previous weeks against Arsenal and Fulham. Manuel Ugarte, his confidence is absolutely shot. It feels like people at United have given up on him. I don't blame them, really, the way he played against Grimsby. And then you've got Kobbie Mainoo, who has not been a regular for United since early February. And look, he's got to look at the bigger picture. He lost his place because he got injured. He came back in at a time where it was all on the Europa League. And at that point, Amorim had settled on Casemiro in midfield with Fernandes or with Ugarte. So he's going to have to bide his time. And then the season peters out with him just playing, primarily starting in meaningless Premier League games that are not that important. So he was always going to struggle for his rhythm there. And I don't agree with Amorim not using him against Arsenal or against Fulham. He should have come on against Fulham. He should have come on for Fernandes. Fernandes was not playing well. And given that Amorim said that Bruno wasn't quite right after his penalty miss, he should have taken him off. But he's clearly loath to doing that because he's his captain, he's his best player. And let's face it, we've lost count of the amount of times he's been playing badly. He does something out of nothing and United win a game or they salvage the game. But Mainoo should have come on. And sometimes you've got to be selfish as a manager. You've got to look after yourself. Amorim must have known by not bringing Mainoo on in that game, it was going to cause a story, and it did very, very quickly afterwards. So he's probably got to look after himself a little bit more in that sense. But Mainoo played 1.5 games last week. He didn't play his way into the team against Grimsby. I thought he was the best of an extraordinarily bad bunch in the first half, but it wasn't a performance that was crying out for Kobbie Mainoo to be put in the team on Saturday against Burnley. I would have picked him and gone on the front foot and tried to balance it out a little bit more with Maguire coming into the back three just to offer a more secure shield and not be too gung-ho. But let's face it, Amrim was never going to do that. He said himself, it's Fernandes or Mainoo. It's always going to be Fernandes. Maybe Mainoo will have to go into one of the two number 10s again. But you look at that area there, United is so well stocked. It feels like it's difficult to imagine
and then if
that's going to come.
If you're Kobbie Mainoo last season, obviously he was played in the number 10 role, and he had played there slightly in academy fixture, so it's worth giving him a chance. And there were some good performances, but I think it became clear for me as the season ended that he probably needed to be relocated back to a deeper midfield role. And he's played up front as well. And the signs from Amram, if I'm Kobbie Mainoo, I'm probably thinking he doesn't know where to play. He's not got a settled role for me. He's not getting the best out of me. And then in the summer, of course, it seems like it's more positive. It seems like Amram's probably settled on a position, and then he comes out, and Amram's can do this as well within his own right. But he said he's competing with Bruno Fernandes, and he's a guaranteed starter. He's never going to come out the starting team. I just think the signals from Amram, from Mainoo's perspective, haven't been good, especially when he's at this stage of his career now where he wants to play. He knows he's good enough to start games, but I do take the point. He has to earn that role, doesn't he? And he is still a very young player.
Yeah, and look, the most relevant point, and it was curious at the time, we certainly touched upon it. Amram's first game against Ipswich Town, Mainoo had been training all of that week. He was in that footage from the Monday that the club posted. And then for him to be on the bench on the Sunday, not only that, the fact that Amram started Casemiro and Christian Eriksen, that was somewhat alarming. I mean, I know that Amram has brought a lot of coaches from Sporting with him. Sometimes coaches, they'll go to a club and they'll want someone who's already embedded at the club as that sounding board. But on that day, I don't care if you were, whatever your role at Manchester United, whether you were Darren Fletcher or one of the kit men or a tea lady, or if Jackie Kay was still there, someone should have tapped Amram on the shoulder and said, do not play Casemiro and Eriksen midfield, because it's a massive backward step. It's sending out the wrong message for a multitude of reasons. One of them is definitely not going to be here this time next year. The other one couldn't be here, might not be here this time next year. Obviously, Casemiro stayed. But you've got Kobbie Mainoo. He's fit again. Make the most of him. And he didn't do that. And I know he did start in the following week. But ever since that first game at Ipswich, you've always sensed there is an issue of some sort between not between Amram and Mainoo, but an issue with how Amram looks upon Mainoo. And
he doesn't completely trust him, does he?
No, he said I'm on top of him about his rhythm and pace, and he said that, you know, if he moves his feet a bit quicker, if he's a bit more intense, he's going to be really, really quick. And I take that point because Mainoo he has been at the scene of the crime quite often. Looking back at that Liverpool game a year ago today when United lost 3-0, like, Casemiro was definitely the fall guy. He was appalling in the first half, so bad he was hooked at half time. But you watch Mainoo's work off the ball, it's not really work. He is ambling, he is jogging, that intensity isn't present. And I go back to the Ryan Gravenberch comparison, that it is very different in that Mainoo had thrived in his first proper season at United. Ryan Gravenberch didn't. But it is still a case of a new coach coming in, and he wants to tweak something in the player's game, in the midfielder's game. Slot did it successfully with Gravenberch last season, to the point that he started in 37 out of their 38 Premier League games as they won the title. Amram clearly wants Mainoo to make some adjustments. The fact that Mainoo, let's face it, doesn't actually want to play for Amram at the moment. If he had his choice, he would play for somebody else. But that's not good. I don't think that's beneficial for him. I don't think it's beneficial for United. There's no sense whatsoever for United to allow Kobbie Mainoo to go on loan to an Italian club. What's the point? It's a very different type of football. It's slower.
Would it not be better for him to play than not to play? If he's going to have a bit part role and be a peripheral squad member, this season. From his perspective, it obviously makes sense.
Now, and it's just gone midday.
Yeah, well, that's what I was about to caveat that.
The window closed at 7 p.m.
From United's perspective, it doesn't make sense now.
United aren't signing a midfielder between now and 7 p.m. I'm 90% certain of that, I would say. And if they were to let Man Utd go, they'd have to bring one in. But it makes no sense when Amrim is saying this midfielder here has got it all. He just needs to be quicker. And then they say, actually, let him go on loan to Italy, where you can operate at a walking pace, at a snail's pace, because the game is so much slower. It doesn't make any sense. They need the bodies. It'll be interesting to see how it develops, what happens this time next year if Man Utd's still at United in January, whether the contract situation is resolved. The problem he's got, of course, is that there are not as many games. United don't have a cup game now until 2026 in the FA Cup third round. And look, there'll be injuries. They've already had a couple to Cunha and Mason Mount. So that all of a sudden you think, well, he could start the Manchester derby if those two are out for that. And he is probably dependent on one or two injuries because of how sparse United's schedule is. They've got they'll have 3 games in September, won't they? With City, Chelsea, and I think Brentford, and that's it. And then all of a sudden another international break comes around. So it's people at United sympathise with him, and I do sympathise with him to an extent, but he's got to take his chances when he starts. At Grimsby Town, he didn't. He was not blameless on that night. I thought he was okay in the first half, but he was guilty of sloppy passes. But that said,
he was the best of a bad bunch.
There was some running off the ball against Burnley, I remember, in the second. He chased back, and I thought, that's an improvement. That's someone who's actually sprinting off the ball, and you don't see that often enough from him. And if he does that more often, and also United have got to look after themselves. Fernandes is out of contract in 2027. There's every chance he'll go next year, having considered going this year. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, why did we sign Kobbie Mainoo? And they could be asking themselves that about all the right-footed left wingers that they've let go as well.
We'll briefly touch on Burnley, Samuel, just to end the podcast. Obviously, transfers were always going to take priority. Today, it's a very busy day. A very important win for United, a late winner from Bruno Fernandes from the spot to atone from his miss the weekend before against Fulham. I think the celebration said a lot, didn't it, at the final whistle? Fernandes screamed into the air. He was mobbed by Dalot, who was, of course, fist pumping to the crowd as usual. It almost felt like a win to seal Champions League qualification or a World Cup victory, the way it was celebrated, because it was so meaningful in the context of the week after Grimsby.
It also worried me a little bit because they did this. There was a lot of chest bumping, fist bumping after winning a throw-in or a goal kick against the might of Ipswich in February when they hung on for a win with 10 men. And that ended 3-2 as well, of course, coincidentally. And they were doing it, Dalot and Fernandes, after winning a goal kick on Saturday. I thought that was a little bit excessive. Like, it is, come on, it's Burnley, and you're scraping past Burnley as well. There have to be some, I mean, the standards have plummeted at United anyway, but somebody, Bruno Fernandes of all people, should be the one to restore them, and he has strove to do that over 5.5 years now. United played well in the first half, and there's been a lot of criticism of Amrim's body language, which I can't understand really, because I'd be the same as him. Like, after Mbumo scored, he turned, didn't he, and just shook his head as if
he was fascinating to watch, wasn't he?
Why the hell could they not have done that at 1-0? Why could they not have done that then? And a lot of people would be thinking that. And he's not there to be a cheerleader, to be, running up the touchline and over celebrating. He's there to keep the players on edge. And if players have got a problem with that, then I've got a problem with them playing for Manchester United.
Wasn't it at 2-1 when I think Fernandes' shot flashed wide of the post and Amrim just looked so stressed because he knew that he needed a 2-goal advantage, the importance of it.
Yeah, he's thinking, we need another goal here because I've got that guy in goal up there, and if I've not got that guy in goal, I've got the other guy in goal. And then someone mentions Tom Heaton, and he just scowls at them, and something that doesn't come into his thinking. But that was the problem, and it was the problem in a lot of games last season as well. They struggled to score goals still, but they looked very good in the first half, and it was obviously disruptive for them to lose Cunha and then lose Mount. And I thought Xerxes did okay by and large, but really it should not have been. It should not have been that taxing for them, needing an added time penalty. That kind of summed it up. That they in the end they scraped past Burnley by getting that penalty in added time. And it was a penalty. It was completely the correct call. I know sometimes, especially after what happened at the weekend at Chelsea, that we can home in quite a lot on VAR, but in the first half, it was strange that it wasn't even deemed a foul by Kyle Walker on Mason Mount. It felt like Kyle Walker accepted it was a foul on Mason Mount. He was just hoping that it was outside the area, which it was, and then all of a sudden it's not a free kick at all. But that was
even after watching that back on Match of the Day, yeah, I came to that conclusion. We said in the press box to each other that is a foul, and after watching it again after coming home, that was a foul. It was a really strange decision. It
was, sorry, but in the end, Jadon and United's own Jadon and Anthony won't be playing at Old Trafford again. But fortunately, Jadon Anthony was playing at Old Trafford and gifted them that penalty.
Yep. We'll move on then, Samuel. That'll be the end of the podcast. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. I'll try and be in some light next time I do one of these. This is pretty ridiculous. I've got the main lights on overhead, but it gives the sense that I'm in the back cave or something when I'm very much not.
I missed out on your reaction to the Man Utd comment, which is disappointing. So you'll have to get that sorted. Hopefully, whatever we've said in this podcast doesn't age too quickly. Again, I will stress we'll have recorded it on the podcast. Have recorded the podcast on deadline day morning. Enjoy your week. We'll be back later on to record another podcast. Take care.